As few as 70,000 Mandaeans remain on Earth, and some of the last families protecting the religion are living behind ordinary brick houses in Toronto suburbs. They still perform baptism rituals in flowing water, speak fragments of an ancient Aramaic language, and marry almost entirely within the community by tradition. But their grandchildren are growing up Canadian. And elders quietly admit something they were never supposed to say out loud: this may be the last generation that stays. Drive through parts of Mississauga or Scarborough and you'd never notice it. Same grocery stores. Same school buses. Same quiet suburban streets lined with parked SUVs and brick homes. But behind some of those front doors are people carrying traditions older than entire nations. Not metaphorically. Literally. A few streets away from busy Toronto highways, Mandaean families still gather for Masbuta, a full baptism ritual performed in flowing water. White robes. Ancient prayers. Complete immersion. The language spoken during the ceremony traces back to Aramaic, the same language historians believe was spoken around the time of Jesus. That ritual survived the collapse of empires. It survived invasions. It survived ISIS. Now elders quietly worry it may not survive Instagram, dating apps, and suburban Canadian life. Because unlike most religions, you can't really convert into Mandaeism. You're born into it. Which means every lost marriage, every child who stops learning the language, every family that slowly drifts away, hits like a countdown clock. And almost nobody in Canada knows any of this exists. The Mandaeans came here after decades of war and persecution across Iraq and the Middle East. Many arrived with almost nothing. No stability. No guarantee they'd even be accepted. Just family names, sacred prayers, and the pressure of carrying a religion that could disappear within a generation if too much gets lost. And hidden across Toronto are other ancient communities carrying that same fear. The Druze. The Yazidis. Groups so private and misunderstood that even their neighbors often have no idea who they are. Not because they're hiding something dangerous. Because history taught them that visibility can get you killed. And once you hear what these communities survived before arriving in Canada, the silence makes complete sense. The Yazidis didn't arrive in Canada carrying heirlooms. Most arrived carrying trauma. In 2014, ISIS stormed Yazidi villages across northern Iraq and turned an ancient religious minority into the target of a genocide. Thousands of men were executed. Women and girls were kidnapped and sold into slavery. Entire towns emptied almost overnight. And even now, more than a decade later, many survivors still struggle to talk about what happened. But in parts of Toronto, especially around Scarborough and nearby suburbs, Yazidi families are quietly rebuilding lives that were shattered in a matter of days. What makes their story different is how recent everything still feels. For older communities, persecution lives in memory. For many Yazidis here, it lives in their phone gallery. Some still keep voice notes from relatives who never made it out. Some still wake up to messages from family members trapped in refugee camps. And yet during the day, life looks almost completely ordinary. Parents drive for Uber. Teenagers scroll TikTok at bus stops. Kids play soccer outside apartment buildings while grandparents sit inside speaking Kurmanji, the Kurdish dialect many feared their grandchildren would stop understanding. That tension is everywhere. One world inside the house. Another outside it. Inside rented halls and community centers around Toronto, elders serve dolma and flatbread while younger Yazidis switch effortlessly between English and Kurdish mid-sentence. Some girls wear jeans and sneakers while older women sit nearby in long traditional dresses and white headscarves. Nobody argues about it openly. But the divide is there. Because survival used to mean invisibility. Now it might mean learning to change without disappearing. And that question hangs over almost every family. How much can a community adapt before it stops being itself? Historians have documented 74 firmans, imperial edicts ordering their persecution, over centuries. The 2014 ISIS attack is considered the 74th. Which explains why trust does not come easily. Some community members still avoid interviews entirely. Others hesitate before mentioning religious practices on camera. Not because they think Canadians will harm them, but because secrecy became instinct generations ago. And once you understand what they survived, that instinct feels less like paranoia and more like a survival reflex nobody ever got around to turning off. But the Yazidis are only one piece of this hidden world inside Toronto. Because another community here protected its beliefs so carefully for centuries, outsiders were once forbidden from even learning their religious teachings at all. If you're watching this story, hit the like button so YouTube understands you want the next chapter unlocked. And tell me in the comments, which beautiful country are you watching from? And what's the exact time there right now? The Druze have spent nearly 1,000 years mastering one skill better than almost any religious group on earth. How to survive by staying unreadable. Not invisible. Unreadable. Even today, many Druze won't discuss certain religious teachings with outsiders at all. Historically, religious teachings were revealed only to the initiated, a group known as the Ukkel, while the uninitiated, the Juhal, were kept outside the inner circle entirely. You could live next door to a Druze family for 20 years and still know almost nothing about what they actually believe. And honestly, that's exactly how many of them prefer it. Because for the Druze, privacy was never about mystery. It was protection. Their religion was born in the 11th century during political chaos in the Middle East. Over centuries, Druze communities learned surviving often meant blending in, staying quiet, and revealing as little as possible to outsiders. That instinct followed many families all the way to Canada. Today, one of the largest Druze communities in Canada is spread across the Greater Toronto Area. From the outside, life looks completely integrated. Families run businesses. Kids attend Canadian schools. Teenagers play hockey, listen to Drake, and argue with their parents in a mix of English and Arabic. But inside community spaces, another reality still exists. Religious elders debate how much tradition can bend before it breaks. Parents quietly worry about interfaith marriage. And younger Druze are growing up in a country where individual identity matters more than collective survival. Because unlike persecution, assimilation doesn't arrive violently. It arrives slowly. One generation stops speaking Arabic fluently. The next stop is attending community gatherings. Then one day, traditions that survived crusades, empires, and wars suddenly exist only in old photographs and grandparents' memories. Some younger Druze feel caught directly in the middle of that tension. Too westernized for their ancestral communities. Too culturally distinct for mainstream Canadian life. So they build a third identity instead. Something hybrid. Part of Toronto. Part Lebanon or Syria. Part modern life. Part inherited memory. A young Druze woman in Mississauga might know every prayer by heart. But still pause to Google certain Arabic words before religious gatherings. Completely at home in Canada. Completely at home nowhere else. Traditional music echoes through banquet halls while teenagers film TikToks in the corner. Older relatives speak about preserving the culture while younger cousins joke in English about not knowing enough Arabic to answer back properly. Nobody says it directly. But underneath the laughter is the same quiet fear every one of these communities shares. What happens when survival is no longer the problem? For the first time in centuries, these communities are physically safe. And that safety might be the very thing slowly dissolving the world they fought to protect. For decades, these communities were described as hidden. Secretive. Closed off from the outside world. But after spending time inside these neighborhoods, that description starts to feel wrong. Because the Druze, the Yazidis, and the Mandeans were never really hiding from Canada. They were hiding from history. From memories passed down through generations about what happens when small religious communities become too visible. Empires collapse. Governments change. Neighbors turn. And suddenly the traditions your family protected for centuries become dangerous to practice out loud. That fear didn't disappear when they arrived in Toronto. It just became quieter. The thing threatening these communities now isn't violence. It isn't exile. It isn't even discrimination. It's comfortable safety. Normal life. A Mandaean teenager choosing not to learn the language because English is easier. A Yazidi family realizing their kids feel more connected to Toronto than to Sinjar. A Druze grandfather watching his grandchildren answer him in English instead of Arabic at the dinner table. Tiny moments. Almost invisible. But together they reshape entire worlds. Some younger members are trying to preserve traditions online now. In 2025, Mandaean communities were organizing TikTok preservation events specifically to document and share their ancient traditions. Yazidi cultural groups have been using YouTube to teach Kurmanji, their endangered dialect, to diaspora children growing up far from Iraq. Organizing community events so younger generations actually meet each other instead of drifting apart across different suburbs. Others quietly admit something more painful. Maybe cultures do not disappear all at once. Maybe they fade one ordinary day at a time. One missed gathering. One forgotten prayer. One child deciding the old ways no longer fit the life they want. And honestly, there's no villain in that story. That's what makes it so complicated. Because this is what survival was supposed to look like. Safe neighborhoods. Good schools. Freedom. A normal life. The exact future their grandparents prayed for. And yet preserving an ancient identity inside a modern multicultural city may turn out to be harder than surviving persecution ever was. The real question isn't whether these communities survived history. It's whether history survives inside their children. And if you think ancient hidden worlds disappearing into modern life is unsettling, wait until you see what's buried underneath Rome. Beneath crowded streets and tourist cafes lies a maze of forbidden catacombs filled with forgotten symbols, secret burials, and stories the city rarely talks about publicly. Watch Rome's Forbidden Catacombs, What They're Hiding Beneath the City, Nobody Talks About This, next. Subscribe and tell us which hidden community we should cover next.